A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to meet you virtually today. The topic of cybersecurity is constantly gaining in importance because threats and cyber attacks increase in frequency and intensity, as all of you might be very well aware of. As more data is processed by companies and individuals daily, the storing, accessing, and using of data should be a priority area of concern for all of us. However, the sense of urgency and the sense of preparedness for potential threats is not always very well developed. We push it away. We don't think it'll hit us, and hopefully it will never hit any of you, but it could happen. And therefore, we wanted to bring this topic to you, to our members, as you might want to update your knowledge about these topics. We are glad to have two experts today who are willing to share their experience and their expertise with us. Firstly, we have Mr. Patrick Gillis. He's the head of product solutions and transformation programs at BKM Orange. He will talk about the change of business realities, especially since the pandemic has introduced home office as a permanent feature to our working environment, and how businesses need to tackle the topic of cybersecurity overall. Secondly, we have Mr. Luke Evans. He's the regional sales manager for CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike specializes in data safety and publishes an annual global threat report. And I'm very much looking forward to your contribution as well, because both of you will have a lot of interesting facts and data to share with us. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank both of you to prepare this seminar webinar, to share your time and your knowledge. And now I would like to hand over the microphone to Mr. Gillis to start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Let's try some sharing. Perfect. So first of all, from my side also, thank you for participating in this webinar on cybersecurity, and also a lot of thanks to the Chamber of Commerce to give BKM Orange and our strategic security partner CrowdStrike this opportunity. But before diving into depth, I want to give some broader framework of today's business. And we as BKM Orange are more than just a mobile operator. The ICT solution that we are offering today are not limited to connected employees only. As an ICT operator, we ensure that not only employees are connected every day, everywhere, every place, but also machines and network. And our mission is therefore to strengthen this ICT position more broadly and to make it more tangible for the outside world. So before we're going to zoom into the cybersecurity, I want to give you and want to share you some insights and three kind of main lines. First of all, do you know that 93% of a successful data breach occur in less than 1 minute, which is stunning. The average time that takes to identify a breach is 207 days. And last but not least, 43% of the cyber attacks are indeed also on SME level. But before diving into that, please do take one step back. The main reason of all the above, the need of cybersecurity, is that the business environment has changed. And we within Orange, BKM Orange, have created for that a framework which is called Connected. And within that framework, we face some new challenges. If an SME wants to focus on his growth, their business will need to address three different topics. The first of all is new expectations of the employees. So working is not longer tied, as we all know, to one place. It's driven by mobile technologies. Workers are much flexible. They demand also the flexibility to balance the work life. Secondly, we have the new competitive environment from our sector. So digital technologies enabled companies to gain competitive advantages. The behavior of companies, their employees, but also the market has significantly changed. And one of the main drivers that we saw in Belgium, 36% of the Belgian companies have accelerated their digitalization since the pandemic. And last but not least, we also have new expectations on the customer side. And in order to meet those new expectations, we also need digitalization. More than 40% are using more than 4 different channels to get in contact with their reseller. And we are talking here about the phenomenon of omni-channel. So for us, if we identify those challenges of growth, we're focusing within BKM Orange and Orange on 4 different pillars that we can support. The first one is digitalization of the SME, which meets the customer's new expectation. The second one is modern workplaces to meet employees' expectation. The third one, the topic of today, is data security, and of course, to stay compliant with that. And last but not least, new technology. Which brings us back to the security topic. And looking at that security topic, in the context of global digitalization of organization, and I just illustrated with hybrid working, connecting objects or cloud, the premises of a company, it's much more expanding. And from that side, it's very important to have attention to the vulnerability and the exposed to cyber risk. At the same time, the threat continues to grow in every increasing volume of attacks. And that's why within BKM Orange, we developed a very direct way to act towards data security, to install a good level of security that can support the new ecosystem of an SME. And for us, we have 3 different levels. The first one is protection of your network. The second one is protection of your end devices, PCs, laptops, and servers. And the last one is protection of the mobile fleet. And for those solutions, we are working together with our strategic security partner, CrowdStrike. So, Luke, I will hand over the word to you and to dive more in depth and share some insights you have seen within the CrowdStrike environment.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity for us to share some of our knowledge and how we look at the threat landscape. I'm really looking forward to sharing some insights with all of you. So maybe first, I think I like to use this slide before we get started with the presentation. And I think it's very recognizable to a lot of people. There's a tremendous amount of vendors out there in the security landscape and a lot of point solutions. And I guess every vendor has got their story. So for the customer, it can be a bit confusing who does what. I think a lot of people do antivirus and extended detection and response, do firewalling. But when you talk about a vendor, it's not so much what you do, but I think what's very important to talk about is why you do what you do. And at CrowdStrike, you should look at us as being a platform that was born in the cloud, cloud native, that consists of technology, people, and processes with the sole intention to stop breaches. I heard from Patrick and from you guys that with some people it was very close to home, right? What we want to do is we want to protect you against economic, operational, and image damage. That's very important. Now, when you talk about stopping breaches, I think there's 3 things that's very important. I think it's the who, the time, and the how. Talking about the who, first of all, if you see this slide, you probably think CrowdStrike is into manga or cartoons, and we've got some very cool merchandising, but it's actually how we depict the adversaries. On the left side, you have the spider, the right side, you've got a panda. It's how we depict the adversaries. And what we say is you don't really have an issue with malware as such, but you've got an issue with somebody who's trying to cause you damage. And if you don't know anything about that person or organization, very difficult to protect your crown jewels or your core assets against an attack. And that's why we say actually intelligence powers everything we do at CrowdStrike. It's very important that you gain that insight. And I'd like to share a few insights with you. So when you look at the motivations of the adversaries, you've got three typical motivations out there. You've got the nation states, for example, China. For them, it could be very interesting to gain trade secrets before negotiating deals with companies or other countries. You've got the e-crime side of the house. Their motivation is, let's say, financial. And then you have the hacktivists. Think about organizations that out of, let's say, ecological motivations would want to, cause damage or do stuff that's malicious. So a very important thing is to know who is trying to cause damage. Now, when you talk about nation state sponsored terrorism, cyber terrorism, it's talking about espionage, destruction, and data extortion. Now, the nation states that we've tracked the most at CrowdStrike are China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. This is a slide of the Netherlands, but what we can do is also very easily track which cyber criminals are active in a certain country. So we do see, for example, in the Netherlands, Russian Federation, North Korea are very active, that country. Now, that's the who. So you need to really make sure you know who is trying to cause you damage. The second thing is the time. What we say at CrowdStrike is it's not survival of the fittest so much, it's survival of the fastest. Now, this is a pretty old slide. It dates back to 2018, and I left it in there on purpose. Any security company that tells you that you can guarantee 100% nothing is going to get through, you're 100% protected, is not telling you the truth. It's always a mouse game between the good guys and the bad guys. And sometimes the bad guys do get through. Now, if you take a look at the bears, they're the Russians, pretty good. The moment they do get through and start doing what we call lateral movement, that means moving within your network, it starts to become more difficult to get rid of it, and it starts to cause you more and more damage. Now, if you say 18 minutes and 49 seconds, typically, 2018, the Spider, which are the cyber criminals, it took them on average 9 hours and 42 minutes. Ideally, what you should be able to do is follow what we call a 1-10-60 rule. So if something does get through, you should be able to detect it in 1 minute. You should be able to investigate it within 10 minutes, and you should be able to resolve it within 60 minutes. Now, what we've seen is as the threat landscape has accelerated, the 1990s is pretty easy, but if you take a look at these days, you can even get threat as a service, so people can actually buy ransomware and they can use it as a SaaS solution. So that means that attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated and people can gain access a lot faster. Now, if we move to today, and we look at the 9 hours and 42 minutes in 2021, that was down to 1 hour and 38 minutes. And if you take a look at the time that it took an InfoSec team to remediate it, took 162 hours. So that means a lot of damage could have been caused in the meantime. So that's very important to be able to detect very quickly remediate. So you talk about mean time to detect, you need to make sure that that goes up very steeply, and mean time to respond, that increases drastically compared to the current situation. Now, that's the time. Let's take a look at the how. So one of the things that we've also noticed is that there's been a big shift from malware attacks to non-malware attacks. Identity theft, right? That's one of the easiest ways to gain access. If you get somebody's username and password, you're in there. But what we've also seen is that there's a very, interesting sounding term called living off the land binaries. What it basically means is that hackers are using binaries inherent to the operating system to camouflage what they're doing. So it's very difficult to detect these kind of attacks. And that's why typically old school antivirus was using what we call indicators of compromise. The way I like to explain it is with COVID, in order to create a vaccine, somebody first needs to be infected. You need to know about it. Once that's there, then you can remediate against it. Well, you need a new kind of approach, and you need to work with what we call indicators of attack. That's where you can actually detect malicious behavior without it already being known. So that's one thing that's very important. There's a lot of attacks that are non-malware these days. Another thing I like to share with you is on the dark web, right? The easiest way to gain access is through stolen credentials. Well, the dark web is like any business. It's driven by supply and demand, and you can see that the credentials being offered are starting to become a lot cheaper these days. And let's say even you invest $4,000 for a financial services company to gain access. If you can extort them for $3 or $4 million, you've done a good business deal there. So another thing that we noticed, and if you take a look at old school antivirus or endpoint protection, is that as the threats evolved, you start to gain a lot of legacy solutions that's been installed on the endpoints. Antivirus, endpoint detection and response, security hygiene, or a sandboxing solution. And that caused two things. The first thing is that because of them all needing CPU and memory to run, you started getting pretty bad performance because the endpoint started slowing down a lot because of heavy load, the endpoints. The second thing is that you used to start having conflicts, Windows blue screens of death, kernel panic attacks from Linux systems, and that's not a good thing. So you need to take a different approach, and let's take a look at how you do it. How do you prevent a breach? Well, one of the first pillars is your endpoint security. First of all, you want to prevent as much as possible. If something does get through, you want to be able to detect it and respond to it as soon as possible, and preferably in an automatic way. That's your endpoint security. Recently, we've actually moved from EDR to what we call extended detection and response, and that's where we integrate with other security vendors, and we allow all the alerts to come to our platform and analyze that through machine learning and artificial intelligence and reduce detections of a threat from, let's say, many hours to, let's say, several minutes and hours to be able to respond a lot faster to a security breach. Now, the second pillar is cloud security. As many companies adopt cloud, it offers a lot of benefits to the business, but it also increases your attack surface. So you need to be able to secure your cloud, and cloud security, obviously a lot of companies, they don't just have one cloud security vendor. So let's say being able to gain visibility in all the various clouds there and implement best practices, ensure applications are developed in a secure way is very important. So you need to tackle your cloud security. The third pillar is managed services. If you start doing detection and response, you need to really start to do threat hunting. And we notice with a lot of companies, it's very difficult to find staff, or they have some staff, but they don't really have a lot of time left to do that. So that's why it's important, if you don't have the resources internally to do threat hunting and detection and response, it's very important that you get some help. Another pillar is security and IT operations. One of the things you want to be able to do is you want to be able to check your security hygiene. Do you have weak passwords? Are there certain versions of applications that shouldn't be running anymore because there's vulnerabilities in them? Which applications have I got running everywhere? That's important. But then also another thing that's important is vulnerability management. You need to know which operating systems or which endpoints have got vulnerabilities that can be breached, and you need to patch them. You need to also know, are there certain files on my servers that have been altered when they shouldn't have been altered? This is called file integrity management. You need to take care of that side of the house as well. And then moving to the next pillar, threat intelligence. You need to know who your adversaries are. And there's several ways that we can help you with that. We can either provide a search engine on the dark web, whereby you can see, is there information, are the usernames and passwords available on the dark web? And how can I best protect against hackers? Which adversaries are active in my vertical in Belgium, or Germany, or Luxembourg, and how can I best protect against them? That's threat intelligence. And then one of the main discussions we have with a lot of our customers and prospects is, how do I secure my identity? How can I protect against somebody who's gained my username and password, has got access to my account? There's things like implementing what we call jump boxes, so only allowing certain laptops or endpoints to gain access to your crown jewels on the network. They're important resources. The other thing is protecting against impossible travel. If I log in here to my account from Antwerp, 9 o'clock in the morning, somebody else logs in Hong Kong at 10:30, either, you know, I've won Euro Millions and I've got very fast means of transport, or something wrong is going on, and we can then push what we call multi-factor authentication, so an SMS that you need to verify that it's you. So protecting your identity, very important. And then gaining visibility, so log management. If you've got 20 various security products out there, you want to have a central place where all the alerts come, so you can start stitching these things together and gain visibility. That's a very important pillar. And then last but not least, it's how you integrate with other vendors in the market. We talked about time. Now, if a security team has to start investigating logs and events from, let's say, 10, 20, 30 different vendors, they tend to spend a lot of time doing that. Now, what's important these days is that as a security vendor, you can cooperate and integrate through APIs with other vendors out there. And that's moving into the realm of what we call XDR. It's just a few slides to demonstrate vendors we can integrate with. But I thought the next slides is a good way to explain how XDR works. So what you want to get out of it is you want to be able to reduce your time to detect and reduce your time to respond. So how it works is you have all the different security vendors you have. They, through application interfaces, they send all of their telemetry through to our clouds with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we stitch all of these different alerts together, let's say reducing 1,000 alerts to maybe 10 events that your security team can work on and investigate. That's how XDR works and how it can benefit an organization. What I'd like to end with is a quick call to action. So the takeaway I'd like to give you is, first of all, ensure the enterprise is properly secured. You've got the right products, things like firewalls, endpoint security implemented. And then prepare to prevent in a 1-10-60 method, so that you should, if something does get through, you've got everything set up that within 1 minute you can detect, investigate, and respond within 60 minutes to remediate. Implement next generation protection. If you've got staff in the house, I would say drill, drill, drill. We've got organizations, they have what you call a blue team and a red team, and they simulate what happens when breaches happened. If you do not have that in the house, you can contact organizations like BKM or ourselves that can help you with that. So make sure that you are prepared, and very important is make sure you know who your adversary is. So I'd like to say a big thank you for giving me the time to share these insights. I think there's a Q&A session afterwards.
I actually would have directly a question. You gave some indication on what to do, but let's just assume we have probably mostly small and medium-sized companies listening, and how can they, I mean, in terms of mental preparation, how can they be prepared to protect their systems? Of course, they will have a provider, be it you or another one, but what is the mindset? What do they have to be aware of, and what do they have to keep in mind? Also in terms of organizational structure. So not only knowing there is a threat somewhere out there, but also concretely, what do I have to do? How do I actually do a drill? How do I prepare my stuff? So more on the very hands-on practical side, what would you advise SMEs to do in order to be better prepared for potential threat?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question, and you're talking about SME companies. So obviously we talk a lot with large companies who do have a big team in there. My advice would be to seek external help. I think it's very easy for us to say, well, you need to drill, 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 and you need to prepare for that. I think you should identify somebody within the organization that is, let's say, single point of contact or does have that responsibility. I think that's very important. I think seek external help if you do not have sufficient resources. And what I think is also very important is you've got one thing that's technology. The other thing is user awareness, and I think it's a matter of also training organizations and users in terms of password best practices and let's say things like preventing against phishing attacks. I think that's very important as well. But it's not always a given that companies do have all the resources to do that. So if you don't have them, seek help, I would say.
On the practical side, Margaret, if I may add it to the insights of Luke, what we do, we always started with an audit. We have some auditing tools, some services that our SME customer can get from BKM. We are starting with the audit, and from the audit on, we already have some insights how protected they are. And from that on, we are creating together with the IT manager or with the managing director a plan to establish a very secure environment. On the mail environment, and because we have, as Luke already mentioned, a lot of phishing, a lot of CEO fraud, but also on the endpoint security. And by triggering those customers, by just triggering to be aware of something has to happen, that is always a good first point.
Mm-hmm. And when you do the audit, which are the aspects that you assess with the company?
In the audit, we have two typical kind of audits. The first audit is more on the pure IT infrastructure part. So we're bringing a detailed list of every devices which is connected to the network. So everybody is already aware that a lot of devices are connected, endpoint devices, service, and that kind of stuff. On the second hand, on the mail environment, we are doing a mail audit, and that's a program which is running throughout Office 365 if you're using Office 365, and then it's detecting possible breaches. And from then on, we can create a very detailed report to discuss that with our customers.
Thank you. I have one more question, and then, of course, we can open the floor to questions. But I think many companies, smaller ones, might still have a server on site and not be in the cloud yet. There are different ways of assessing the security and safety of a server. It has pros and cons, whereas the cloud also has pros and cons. What would you advise a company that still has a server which is probably not too old, how to secure a server on site? And if you would transfer all your data to the cloud, what does the customer have to take into consideration while doing that?
Well, I'll just answer that one. So if you've still got a server on site, let's say in a classical data center, it's sufficient just to provide that server with an agent, and it will be protected. We do use our clouds to, let's say, protect against the modern threats through AI and machine learning. So that's covered. When moving to the cloud, I think it's very important not to just do a shift and lift from what you have on premise and just move it to the cloud. You need to take into account that although Microsoft or Amazon, they do provide you with a certain basic sense of security, that there is, let's say, security provided, you need to make sure that when you do the move to the cloud, you work in a different way. Just not trying to get too technical, but applications these days, they're developed in what we call containers, technologies like Kubernetes and Docker. Now, it's very easy to do it when it's on premise. You can just install an agent on the infrastructure. When you move to public cloud, you can't just go and install an agent. You need to work with what we call a privileged or unprivileged container, that you gain visibility in all your assets, whether it's in AWS, GCP, or in Microsoft. So you need to gain visibility, and you also need to protect against best practices so that the applications are developed in a secure way, that there's no vulnerabilities in the code. So you do need to take a different approach, and if people are interested, they can come and talk to us. We've got a lot of experience in helping organizations moving to the cloud.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luca and Patrick, for your presentations from my side.